In the small village of Umeus, in the heart of Igbo land, lived two best friends, Uche and Ike. They grew up together, explored the forest together, and even attended the same school. Their friendship was strong and unbreakable. Uche was tall and handsome, with a bright smile that could light up the whole village. Ike, on the other hand, was short and stocky, with a mischievous grin that always seemed to get them into trouble. As they grew older, their friendship only deepened. They became inseparable, and the villagers would often joke that they were like two peas in a pod. Uche's father, a wealthy businessman, would often take Ike on his business trips, treating him like his own son. Ike's mother, a talented cook, would often prepare delicious meals for Uche, who would devour them in seconds. Their families loved each other, and the bond between Uche and Ike only grew stronger. But little did they know, their friendship was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. A beautiful young woman named Ada had just moved into the village, and both Uche and Ike were immediately smitten. Ada was kind, intelligent, and had a smile that could light up the stars. Both friends couldn't help but fall for her charms, and a rivalry began to brew between them. But at this point, they were still unaware of the devastating consequences their rivalry would bring. Ada was a city girl, born and raised in the bustling streets of Enugu. She had moved to Umeus to live with her grandmother, who had fallen ill. Ada was kind and gentle, with a heart full of love for everyone she met. She quickly settled into the village, making friends with the other girls and helping her grandmother with her farm work. Uche and Ike were immediately drawn to Ada's charming smile and infectious laugh. They would often find excuses to visit her at her grandmother's compound, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Ada, unaware of the rivalry brewing between the two friends, welcomed them with open arms, happy to have made new friends in the village. As the days turned into weeks, Uche and Ike found themselves spending more and more time with Ada. They would take her on walks through the forest, show her the secret waterfalls, and even teach her how to play the traditional Igbo games. Ada was enchanted by the village and its people, and Uche and Ike were enchanted by her. But as their friendship deepened, the tension between Uche and Ike began to grow. They both knew they had fallen for Ada, but neither of them wanted to admit it. They were afraid of ruining their friendship, but they couldn't help the way they felt. As the days turned into weeks, the unspoken rivalry between Uche and Ike grew stronger. They would often find themselves competing for Ada's attention, trying to outdo each other in silly games and challenges. Ada, oblivious to the tension between them, would laugh and cheer them on, happy to see her new friends having so much fun. But beneath the surface, the rivalry was simmering. Uche and Ike would often argue over silly things, their friendship beginning to fray at the edges. They both knew they had to confront their feelings, but neither of them wanted to be the first to admit their love for Ada. One day, as they were walking through the forest, I turned to Uche and said, "My friend, I think it's time we talked about Ada." Uche's heart skipped a bit as he wondered what Ike was going to say. Was he going to confess his love for Ada? Or was he going to try and claim her for himself? Uche's mind was racing as he waited for Ike to continue. But before Ike could say another word, Ada appeared from behind a tree, a look of concern on her face. "What's wrong, guys?" she asked, sensing the tension between them. Uche and Ike exchanged a nervous glance, both of them unsure of how to respond. They didn't want to admit their true feelings in front of Ada, but they also didn't want to lie to her. Ike, trying to think quickly, said, "We were just discussing, the best way to catch fish in the river." Ada's face lit up with excitement. "Oh, I love fishing," she exclaimed. "Can you teach me how to do it?" Uche and Ike exchanged a relieved glance, happy to have avoided an awkward conversation. "Of course, we'd be happy to teach you," Uche said, smiling. As they spent the rest of the day fishing and laughing together, Uche and I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. They both knew they had feelings for Ada, but they were too afraid to admit them. They were afraid of ruining their friendship, and they were afraid of losing Ada's friendship as well. But as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the river, Uche and I couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would they be able to keep their feelings hidden, or would their rivalry eventually tear them apart? The village of Umeus was buzzing with excitement as the annual festival approached. The festival was a time of celebration, a time to come together with friends and family and give thanks for the blessings of the harvest. Uche and Ike were particularly excited, as they had been chosen to perform a traditional dance in front of the whole village. Ada, who had never seen a traditional Igbo dance before, was eager to watch Uche and Ike perform. She had heard so much about the festival, and she couldn't wait to experience it for herself. As the day of the festival approached, the village was filled with the sound of drums and laughter. On the day of the festival, the village square was packed with people. Uche and Ike, dressed in their traditional attire, stood nervously at the front of the crowd, waiting for their cue to begin. Ada, who was sitting in the front row, couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she watched Uche and Ike prepare to perform. She had grown to care for both of them deeply, and she knew how much this performance meant to them. As the drums began to beat, Uche and Ike launched into their dance, their movements energetic and precise. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, and Ada found herself clapping along with the rest. But as the performance came to an end, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Uche and Ike seemed distant, their usual camaraderie missing. She brushed it off as mere nerves, but as the day wore on, she began to notice that the tension between them was growing thicker. As the sun began to set on the festival, Uche and Ike found themselves at odds over a trivial matter. They had been arguing for hours, their voices growing louder and more heated. Before, click on the subscribe button, like, and also share to your friends. Ada, who had been trying to stay out of the way, finally intervened, placing a gentle hand on each of their arms. "What's going on, guys?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. Uche and Ike exchanged a bitter glance, before Uche spoke up. "It's nothing, Ada. Just a misunderstanding." But Ada knew better. She could see the hurt and anger in their eyes, and she knew that this was more than just a simple misunderstanding. As the days passed, the rift between Uche and Ike grew wider. They stopped speaking to each other, and the village, which had once been filled with their laughter and camaraderie, began to feel empty and quiet. Ada tried to reach out to both of them, but they pushed her away. They were too proud, too hurt, and too angry to listen to reason. And so, the three friends, who had once been inseparable, found themselves drifting apart, each one lost in their own world of pain and regret. One day, as Ada was walking through the forest, she stumbled upon Uche, sitting by the river, staring out at the water. He looked lost and alone, and Ada's heart went out to him. She sat down beside him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Uche, what's going on?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. Uche turned to her, his eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, Ada," he said, his voice cracking. "I just feel like I've lost my best friend." Ada's heart went out to him, and she knew that she had to do something to bring Uche and Ike back together. But as she looked into Uche's eyes, she saw something there that gave her pause. Something that made her wonder if she was ready for what was to come. Ada's eyes locked onto Uche's, and she saw a flicker of something there, something that looked almost like guilt. She felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized that there might be more to the story than she had initially thought. "Uche, what's going on?" she asked again, her voice firmer this time. "What's really going on between you and Ike?" Uche looked away, his eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for an escape. "I don't know what you're talking about, Ada," he muttered, but Ada wasn't buying it. She knew Uche too well, and she could see the guilt written all over his face. Just then, Ike appeared out of nowhere, his eyes blazing with anger. "You're still lying to her, Uche," he spat, his voice venomous. "You're still pretending like you're the victim." Uche stood up, his fist clenched at his sides. "I'm not lying, Ike," he growled. "You're just too blind to see the truth." Ada's eyes darted back and forth between the two friends, her mind racing with questions. What was going on? What had happened between them? And why were they both so angry? Ike took a step closer to Uche, his eyes blazing with fury. "You're the one who's blind, Uche," he spat. "You're the one who's been lying to me, to Ada, to everyone." Uche's face went white, and Ada felt a shiver run down her spine. "What are you talking about, Ike?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ike turned to her, his eyes filled with pain. "Uche has been secretly seeing Ada's sister, Neoma," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Ada's eyes widened in shock as she turned to Uche. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger. Uche's face went white as he stumbled backward, his eyes wide with fear. "Ada, I can explain," he stammered, but Ada was having none of it. "You're going to explain," she repeated, her voice rising in anger. "You're going to explain why you've been secretly seeing my sister behind my back?" Uche nodded, still trying to defend himself, but Ada cut him off. "No, Uche, you're not going to explain. You're going to apologize. You're going to apologize for betraying me, for betraying Ike, and for betraying the trust we had in you." Uche looked at Ike, who was standing with his arms crossed, a look of disgust on his face. "I'm sorry, Ada," Uche said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong to do what I did. I was wrong to betray you." Ada shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "It's too late for apologies, Uche," she said. "You've broken the trust we had in you. You've broken our friendship." The days that followed were tense and awkward. Uche tried to apologize again and again, but Ada was unforgiving. Ike, on the other hand, was furious. He had always known that Uche was a bit reckless, but he had never thought he would betray their friendship like this. As the tension between them grew, the village began to take sides. Some people blamed Uche for his betrayal, while others blamed Ada for being too harsh. Ike, meanwhile, was caught in the middle, trying to navigate his feelings of anger and loyalty. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that things would never go back to the way they were before. The friendship between Uche, Ike, and Ada had been broken, and it would take a lot to repair it. As the weeks turned into months, the village began to adjust to the new reality. Uche, Ike, and Ada were no longer the inseparable trio they once were. Instead, they were three separate individuals, each trying to navigate their own way through the complex web of relationships and alliances that had formed in the village. Uche, still trying to make amends, began to spend more time with Neoma, Ada's sister. Ike, meanwhile, began to focus more on his farming, trying to distract himself from the pain of losing his best friend. Ada, still hurt and angry, began to spend more time with her family, trying to heal and move on. But as they all tried to move on with their lives, they couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same again. One day, as Ada was walking through the village, she saw a familiar face approaching her. It was her aunt, Ngozi, who had come from the city to visit. Ada was surprised to see her aunt, as she hadn't visited in years. Before we move on, click on the subscribe button, like, and also share to your friends. Ngozi was a kind and wise woman, who had always been a source of guidance and support for Ada. As they hugged and exchanged greetings, Ada couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. Maybe, just maybe, her aunt's visit was exactly what she needed to take her mind off things. But as they walked together through the village, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that her aunt's visit was more than just a coincidence. There was something in her aunt's eyes, something that suggested she knew more about what was going on than she was letting on. As they sat down to eat, Ngozi turned to Ada and said, "I've heard about what's been going on between you, Uche, and Ike. I have to say, I'm not surprised." Ada's eyes widened in shock as she asked, "What do you mean?" Ngozi leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know something about Uche's family, something that could explain why he's been acting so strangely." Ada's curiosity was piqued, and she leaned in closer, eager to hear what her aunt had to say. Ngozi took a deep breath before speaking. "Uche's family has been hiding a secret that could change everything. His father, the wealthy businessman, is not who he seems to be." Ada's eyes widened in shock as Ngozi continued. "He's been involved in some shady dealings, and Uche's been caught up in the middle of it all. That's why he's been acting so strangely, why he's been keeping secrets from you and Ike." Ada felt like she'd been punched in the gut, her mind reeling with the implications. As Ada tried to process what her aunt had just told her, she couldn't help but wonder how far the deceit went. Was Uche's whole family involved? And what about Ike? Did he know anything about what was going on? The more she thought about it, the more Ada realized that nothing was as it seemed. The village, which had once seemed so peaceful and idyllic, was actually a complex web of secrets and lies. And Ada was determined to uncover the truth. Ada's mind was racing with questions and suspicions. She couldn't believe that Uche's family had been hiding such a huge secret. She decided to investigate further, to uncover the truth about Uche's family and their shady dealings. She started by asking around the village, trying to gather more information. But everyone seemed reluctant to talk, as if they were all afraid of something. Ada realized that she would have to be careful, that she was dealing with powerful people who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe. One day, as Ada was walking through the village, she noticed a stranger lurking in the shadows. He was a tall, dark man with a scar above his left eyebrow. Ada felt a shiver run down her spine as he caught her eye and nodded. She quickly looked away, trying to brush off the feeling of unease. But as she continued on her way, she couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger was following her. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. As Ada turned the corner, she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, ready to defend herself, but it was only the stranger. He approached her, his eyes glinting with a warning. "Be careful, Ada," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're playing with fire. Uche's family is not to be trifled with." Ada felt a surge of fear, but she stood her ground. "What do you know about Uche's family?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The stranger smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "I know enough to warn you," he said. "But if you want to know more, meet me at the old baobab tree at midnight." Ada couldn't sleep that night, her mind racing with questions and fears. At midnight, she snuck out of her house and made her way to the old baobab tree. The stranger was already there, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. "So, you want to know the truth about Uche's family?" he said, his voice low and mysterious. Ada nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Then listen carefully," the stranger said. "Uche's family is involved in some very shady dealings. They are smuggling goods, evading taxes, and bribing officials. And Uche is right in the middle of it all." Ada felt like she'd been punched in the gut. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Uche, her friend, her confidant, was involved in such nefarious activities. The stranger nodded, as if he could see the shock and disbelief written all over her face. "I know it's hard to believe," he said. "But it's the truth. And if you want to expose them, you have to be careful. They'll stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe." Ada didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to expose Uche's family, to bring them to justice for their wrongdoings. But another part of her was afraid of the consequences, afraid of losing her friend. As she walked back to her house, she felt like she was torn in two. She didn't know what to do, or who to trust. All she knew was that she had to make a decision, and fast. As Ada struggled with her decision, she received an unexpected visit from Ike. He had been watching her from afar, and he knew that something was wrong. "Ada, what's going on?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. Ada hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But something about Ike's kind and gentle nature put her at ease. She told him everything, from the stranger's warning to her own conflicted feelings. Ike listened attentively, his face growing more and more serious. "I had no idea," he said, when she finished. "But I'm glad you told me. We'll face this together, Ada." Ada felt a surge of gratitude towards Ike. She had never felt so alone, but now, with Ike by her side, she felt like she could face anything. Ike and Ada spent the rest of the day coming up with a plan. They would gather evidence, talk to witnesses, and expose Uche's family for their wrongdoings. Before we move on, click on the subscribe button, like, and also share to your friends. But as they walked, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that they were in over their heads. Uche's family was powerful, and they would stop at nothing to keep their secret safe. Ike, what if we get caught? Ada asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ike looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. We'll be careful, he said. We'll cover our tracks, and we'll make sure we have enough evidence to bring them down. Ada nodded, feeling a sense of resolve wash over her. That night, Ike and Ada snuck out of their houses and made their way to Uche's family compound. They hid behind a bush, watching as Uche's father and his associates loaded crates into a truck. Ada's heart was racing as she took pictures and videos, gathering evidence of the smuggling operation. Ike, meanwhile, was taking notes, documenting every detail. As they watched, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Uche, his eyes scanning the area as if he suspected something was amiss. Ada and Ike held their breath as Uche approached the bush where they were hiding. They were sure they had been discovered, and they prepared themselves for the worst. But just as Uche was about to peer into the bush, his father called out to him. Uche, come here, he shouted. Uche hesitated for a moment, then turned and walked away. Ada and Ike let out a collective sigh of relief. That was close, they thought. Too close. The next day, Ike and Ada took their evidence to the village elder. They told him everything, from the smuggling operation to Uche's involvement. The elder listened attentively, his face growing more and more serious. When they finished, he nodded thoughtfully. I will take care of this, he said. But I need you both to be careful. Uche's family will not take this lying down. Ada and Ike nodded, knowing that they had to be brave. The village elder took swift action, and soon Uche's family was brought to justice. The smuggling operation was shut down, and the village was finally free from their tyranny. Ada and Ike were hailed as heroes, their bravery and determination inspiring the rest of the village. Uche, meanwhile, was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. As the village began to heal and rebuild, Ada and Ike looked to the future. They knew that they still had challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. And so, the story of Ada, Ike, and Uche came full circle. It was a story of friendship, betrayal, and redemption. A story of the power of courage and determination in the face of adversity.